don't forget to subscribe to my channel. Hit that subscribe button, smash it, crash it. Let us know you're there. Hello, I'm Ed Montgomery, aka Dr. Ed. Welcome to Master Key Club. Thank you for being a part, and this is our Master Key class right here in our Master Key Club. And there are several of us day after day joining this new Master Key Club. That's I just like it because it's like a family. It's like a group of us that are coming together and learning together on Wednesday. Look, we've got an election coming up in probably about a week and a few days. But more than anything, that we got to be prepared to do what we have to do to get out there and vote. And you say, here we go with the voting. And look, voting is very important. That we dealt with race, the first one of these. The second one of these, we dealt with oh my goodness, I forgot it that fast. But we dealt with wokeness, and then this time we touched on CRT last week, and you say CRT, critical race theory. Now, I'm not going to bore you with a bunch of this, the little technical things that we deal with, but it's very important that you understand what CRT really is. Because how you think of yourself, how you see yourself, is the most important thing you can understand. Take a moment. If you want to become a part of our Master Key Club, you can hit it 713. You can text 713-742-2035. That number will be on your screen. It'll pop up every now and then. And of course, all those other things. Subscribe and look. I'll talk about that later. Let me get into this. We're coming up on a very critical and crucial election. Let me tell you why it's a critical election. Most people think that power comes from the top down. We think it like that in America. Comes from the if you want to get the information, got to go to the horse's mouth. Well, not necessarily. It doesn't necessarily come from the top down. You got to go to the president. Well, our power is not based on the president down. We're a three-party system here in America. Our power is based basically from the grassroots. But if you don't know that, I'm going to say that again. If you don't, open quote, know, close quote, that, you will miss the whole point of the thing. Civics lesson. The three branches of government: President, Congress, Supreme Court. Okay, if the President, the Supreme Court is supposed to interpret the law. Congress is supposed to make the law. President executes the law. So it also means that the law is not as good as the president thinks. The president can veto the law. If the law, something happens to the law and people say, that's not right, that's wrong, that's right, then Supreme Court can turn around and say, well, let us interpret the law. Well, based on interpretation, the Supreme Court can interpret the law based on what is considered to be original thinking. In other words, they try to put themselves in the mindset of the founders and the framers of the Constitution of the United States. And if they look back, they say, what were they thinking when they made this law? If we can put our minds back then we can judge based on what the framers and the founders of the Constitution, because the framers and the founders of the Constitution is the place where it's kind of like our law book. If you were in church, it would be our scriptures. It would be America's word in so many words, or not. This is how they look at it. So you go back 2,000 years ago in the Bible and figure out this is what Paul was thinking, or maybe what Jesus was thinking, or Peter, James, and John were thinking. And if we can figure out what they were thinking and read the scripture, then we can come up with the meaning of this. That's what they call that kind of, and I mean, of course, it's much deeper than that, but in the Supreme Court, they come up with that. And then when they make a ruling, they make a ruling based on that type of original thinking. This is what the framers, Benjamin Franklin and James Madison, George Washington, and all those people could have been thinking. And so what's happening in our country right now, they're talking about, well, what do they think about race? Well, they really didn't think about race. Oh, but they did. And that's why you have your Ketanji Brown Jackson. That's why you have your justices of the Supreme Court. That's why you have all of these different shifts and changes. The first black president. All these things are happening. What did the framers think? When did they start thinking of people of color as enslaved? We talked about race in one of our earlier programs. Then we talked about wokeness in another earlier part of one of our teachings. What did they think about slaves? When did all of this stuff start getting instituted? As a matter of fact, church people, and listen, when we talk about white and black, don't ever start thinking about, whites didn't like the blacks didn't like the whites, and so they were all at each other's throat. It wasn't all like that. You had, I ain't gonna go back to try to teach the class on white and black. You can go back and look at it. You had white and you had black. But we also understood that white was not white, black was not black, but white was a symbol of what they called white, black a symbol of what they called black, or the African enslaved person. And so, but there were white people, and there were black people, and some were black white people. What in the world are you talking about? In other words, there were black and white, or white, that where the word white does not just mean the skin tone, or it also meant an attitude or believing that I am more than this one over here. But then there were the white people that were the allies of the enslaved black. And they were abolitionists. All right, now we got another term, abolition. So throughout all this time, 1600s, 1700s, 1800s, there were white allies who fought and worked with black enslaved people, even after the enslavement and on into the Reconstruction. Wow. During the enslavement, Harriet Tubman watched that movie. There were what they called abolitionists. And there were some white people who lived and died because they believed that slavery was wrong, especially concerning the will of God. And there were those who were white who believed that slavery was correct according to the will of God. Now, when you've got that going on, and then you have the black enslaved person that is even told, even if we baptize you, we can baptize you, and then your heart can belong to Jesus, but your body, your mind belongs to the slave master. Imagine what that does to your epigenetics. Imagine what that does to your psyche. See yourself divided in pieces like this. Part of you saved, the other part unsaved. Part of you free, the other part unfree. And you pass this, and then you teach your children how to act and react in that area. And then even after slavery is gone, slavery don't just disappear. Even after the Emancipation Proclamation, after Juneteenth, you still had something called Reconstruction, which for about 10 or 11 years, you had people who were learning how to get back into life. And all of a sudden, in other words, they was asking for 40 acres and a mule, which means if you give us some property and a mule or a way to work the land, we'll work the land, we can start getting economically back from the slavery and try to get ourselves back. They gave it to them and then promptly took it away from them and gave it back. Over 400,000 acres from what we were understanding through history, and I'm brushing through this, gave it back to the slave master as reparation, because the slave master claimed that they lost money and income economically because you took our slaves from us. Now, but what does it do to the minds of black people? You go through this time, you go through Reconstruction. After that, you go through what is called Jim Crow. You go into the 1900s. All of this. And then people of color could not even really vote. Yeah, they could vote on a certain aspect of the Constitution, but they could not really vote into that Voting Rights Act. Do you realize you're only talking about 60, 70 years ago? Oh, that was Dr. King, Martin Luther King. They were all fighting for this civil rights movement, Voting Rights Act, which now we're still fighting. People are still fighting. And not just black people, but you also have white people. Not white people, because white people are kind of like what you call your white nationalists that believe this country belongs to them. But your white people who always, even as abolitionists, fought alongside of black people. And now among Latinx people and other people, but you got now some Latinx people who are fighting alongside white people because they believe if they can fight along with the white people that ultimately they can become white in generations, not understanding that they never will. He said, this country's screwed up. God, yeah. And so, but all of a sudden, now you change the spiritual dynamics, especially with people who were formerly enslaved. And here's the spiritual dynamics. You turn around and you say, you are made in the image of God. No longer does your body belong to the slave master and your heart belongs to Jesus, but all of you belongs to God. You begin to say things like, Jesus is not white. Jesus was a Jewish man that lived in the Middle East. Color-wise, he's darker than just white. But there are white people who who are Asian, who are lighter than white people in America. So it's not about color. See, once again, we get into the whole concept of definition. Jesus was a Jewish man of curly hair, a Jewish man who worked hard out as a carpenter. So you understand if Jesus was like that, then Jesus was also a physical man. But the Bible teaches us that God, who Jesus called his father, but the word he called him his father was not because he was his physical father, because God does not have arms, hands, legs. God does not have physical features. So therefore, if that God doesn't have any of that, God doesn't have sperm. If God does not have sperm, then there is no physical father or physicalness to his fatherhood. It is all spiritual. So when Jesus said, my Father, he is talking about the source of life, the beginning of life, that which he is connected to and connected to him. Jesus would say, I'm in the Father is in me. So when Jesus talked about God as his Father, we're not talking about the Sistine Chapel where Adam is trying to reach out to that God up in the... No, that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about Jesus being in God, God being in Jesus. And so we're talking about that kind of fatherhood. Oh, wow. So when we start talking about God in me, not God up in there, but God in me, Christ in me, we're not talking about a physical Christ in us. We're talking about a spiritual anointing, a power, a beginning of life. So what does that have to do with CRT? CRT is what is called critical race theory. Critical race theory is a class that's done in college. Not elementary school, not the second grade, not the sixth grade, not the eighth grade, not even in high school, not even in 12th grade. It doesn't come until college. People teach it in college, especially it's taught to law students. And they teach it to law students so that law students will understand when they're trying cases, when they're going through the law, they need to look at the law to understand that in America's society, the society of America has racial undertones that sometimes people can see things through racial lenses. So you need to take that into consideration when you're trying a case. This is taught to white people. white lawyers as well as black lawyers, as well as Asian lawyers, all lawyers. It's a class. And it's called critical race theory, which I think is what, 40, 50 years old? Yeah. It is not black history. Critical race theory is not black history, although there's black history in critical race theory in order for people to understand it. So when you have white people who say, we don't want that black history taught in our critical race theory taught in our schools. They want to redefine CRT in order to say we don't want black history taught in our schools, which ultimately gets away from your Black History Month, which ultimately will take away understanding black people in black history. Gets rid of your Harriet Tubmans, or you might only wind up with the Dr. Martin Luther King, judge a man by the content of his character. That's all you will get, a whitewashed version of Dr. King, instead of that part where Dr. King went to Washington and says, we come to cash a check. That's NSF. In other words, what America owes people of color. This is what CRT is. CRT is not black history. It is understanding how the history, or how other people make laws, execute laws, based on a perceived history of the United States of America. And that you got to add an understanding of black people in history. And when you understand black people in history, you understand that America is not just all Benjamin Franklin and Thomas Jefferson. But you got some Benjamin Bannekers in there. You've got some, not just Martin Luther King in there, but you got some Malcolm X in there. You've got some Crispus Attucks in Revolutionary War. You've got architects. You've got scientists. You've got so many that our culture is not just black and white, but it is merged. It is multicultural. And now we realize not just black, it's Latinx. It's immigrants. This is America. So if we can turn CRT in just to black history, into black history in order to teach socialism, if we can change the definition and scare people to believing that if you teach black history in American schools, then it's going to turn to socialism and you're going to lose your country, and the other people are going to come for you and take your country and your culture. It's going to scare the SHOOT out of you. Yeah. So what I want to say is you got to take back your definitions. What is it when we look out in space and see all those huge planets? Yeah, I gotta admit, I have been watching all of the little spots on YouTube and things of that sort about this new, I think it's called the Webb telescope. And this telescope is looking way out into the universe. You say you believe that, Dr. Ed? Yeah, I believe it. And it's showing like our planet is sitting right on the spiral of a Milky Way of 400 billion stars. But not only that, but there are also 400 billion galaxies that have 400 billion stars each. Can you imagine how massive that is? And throughout this universe, there seems to be a flow, a harmony, a unity, a connection. I believe this is how our giving works. I don't believe we just throw giving out, or we give to somebody because it's a good thing to do, or it just helps other people. Those are good those are great meaning things. But I also believe that what we give comes back to us. Not necessarily in the same way we gave it, but it does come back to us. How we treat each other in relationships, how we treat our children, it comes back to us. How we treat co-workers on our job, it comes back to us. How we, as you're going down that highway, get that road rage, you pull back on it. So how we treat each other, it comes back to us. And I also believe that when you give into spiritual things, what we're doing, we say ministry, but actually it's service, because we help to serve others. We build bridges for people from one place to another, of bridges of enlightenment. So take a moment. You can use your text to give, and you can text the number that is on your screen. And as you text it, remember that what you're giving does come back to you. And it comes back in this phrase: good measure, pressed down, shaken together, and running over, will people give back into your life. They call it Luke 6:38. It's called reciprocity. It's called you sow, you reap. Some people call it karma, whatever you call it. I believe this one thing: it's coming back to you. Take a moment, give. I'd appreciate it. Thank you so much in advance. Our history is not black history or white history. It is one history. CRT, that's just checking your culture to see about racism. Are we judging things? We got to be aware. We got to wake up. We got to be able to see what's happening with race in our culture. We understand that. Hey, look, my time is up, but I want you to become a part of our Master Key Club. And you can do that, 713-742-2035. Text any amount to that number, and text any amount to that number, and become a part of it. I'll see it there. Hey, my time is up, but make sure you do one thing: vote. Whether you want to or not, whether you like it or not, or whether you think it's going to work or not, do it anyway. There's some things in life you don't want to go to work sometimes anymore, but you get up and do it anyway. Why? Because you need your money. Vote because you need your resources. Look, time is up. Gotta go. Do your thing. Hey, don't forget to subscribe to my channel. Hit that subscribe button. Smash it, crash it. Let us know you're there.